The morning air over the city was crisp, a mix of exhaust fumes, damp pavement, and the distant promise of coffee. At the corner of a bustling downtown street, a small, brightly painted food truck stood like a cheerful island in a sea of gray suits and hurried footsteps. Its name, The Rolling Pin, was written in a warm, looping script above the service window, and from within wafted the irresistible scent of fresh baking and sizzling bacon. This was Clara's world, a four-wheeled kingdom of flour, sugar, and early mornings. She moved with a practiced, efficient grace inside the cramped space, her blonde hair tied back in a messy but secure knot, a smudge of flour already present on her cheek like a badge of honor. She knew her regulars by name, their orders by heart, and their stories by the look in their eyes. There was Mr. Henderson, the retired mailman who always needed his coffee extra sweet to start his day, and Maria, the nursing student who survived on a single breakfast burrito that Clara always made a little larger for her. This food truck wasn't just a business. It was her anchor, the one thing she had built for herself after a life that had often felt built by others. The line was steady, a familiar rhythm of friendly greetings and the exchange of warm paper bags for crumpled bills. Then, he stepped into line. He was jarringly out of place, a figure carved from a different reality. His suit was a deep charcoal, tailored with a precision that suggested it cost more than her entire monthly earnings. His shoes shone despite the city grime, and a sleek, impossibly thin watch peeked from beneath his cuff. He held a phone to his ear, his voice low but sharp, a clipped, authoritative tone that made people instinctively create space around him. He wasn't just wealthy. He radiated a kind of impatient power that the corner of a food truck rarely witnessed. Clara watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention back to the elderly man in front of her. "The usual, Arthur?" she asked, her voice warm and familiar, a stark contrast to the cold business deal being finalized a few feet away. Arthur, a man with a kind, wrinkled face and a worn tweed jacket, beamed at her. "You know it, Clara. My grandkids are visiting, and they say your cinnamon rolls are magic." Clara laughed, a genuine, unforced sound. "Well, I can't promise magic, but I can promise extra icing." The man in the suit ended his call with a sigh, his shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second before straightening again into a rigid posture of control. He looked past Arthur, his gaze landing on Clara, clearly expecting the immediate, deferential service he was accustomed to. He opened his mouth to order, but Clara held up a hand, not rudely, but with a quiet firmness. "He was next," she said, nodding towards Arthur. "Everyone waits their turn here." The man, Elias Vance, though she didn't know his name, blinked. It was a subtle reaction, but one of genuine surprise. The concept of waiting his turn, especially behind a slow-moving old man counting out change, was foreign. He wasn't angry, just displaced. He watched as Clara carefully boxed up 4 large cinnamon rolls, her movements gentle, her smile for Arthur sincere. She didn't rush him. She didn't glance impatiently at the growing line behind Elias. In her small world, the man in front of her was the only one who mattered. Finally, Arthur paid, wished her a good day, and shuffled off, leaving Elias at the front. He stepped forward, a flicker of something unreadable in his stormy gray eyes. He was about to speak, to order the black coffee he desperately needed, but he paused, looking at her properly for the first time. Not as a service worker, but as a person. He saw the flour on her cheek, the faint tiredness around her eyes, and a strength in her posture that felt both familiar and unsettling. He opened his mouth, but the order never came out. Instead, his voice was softer than he intended, a low murmur that seemed to get lost in the city noise, yet was aimed only at her. "Don't you remember me?" Clara froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over a stack of paper cups. The question hung in the air, completely at odds with the transactional nature of her morning. She looked at him again, truly looked, searching the sharp, handsome features of the stranger for a flicker of recognition. His face was that of a man who belonged on magazine covers, not in the periphery of her memory. He was all crisp lines and controlled expressions, a world away from the soft, blurred edges of her own life. "I'm sorry," she said, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "I think you have me mistaken for someone else." Elias's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened, a crack in the polished facade. "No, I don't think so," he said quietly. "It was a long time ago. We were kids. You wore a yellow raincoat, even when it wasn't raining." The detail was so specific, so random, it stopped her cold. A yellow raincoat. She hadn't thought about that coat in over a decade. It had been her favorite, a bright splash of sunshine in the often gray world of the St. Jude's Home for Children. Her mind, against her will, was pulled back into the past, to a time of shared dormitory rooms and meals served on metal trays. And then she saw it, not in his tailored suit or the confidence he wore like a second skin, but in the quiet intensity of his gaze. She saw a boy, a scrawny, quiet boy with eyes that were too old for his face, who rarely spoke and always sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria. His name was Eli. He was the boy she used to save her dessert for, slipping it onto his tray when no one was looking. He was the boy she had defended from bullies, the boy she had shared her only book with. "Eli," she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unguarded smile that completely transformed him. It reached his eyes, chasing away the shadows of the CEO and revealing the boy he once was. "I go by Elias now," he said, his voice laced with a warmth she hadn't heard before. "But yeah, it's me." The line behind him had started to grumble, but neither of them noticed. The bustling city street faded into a muted backdrop. For a moment, they were just two kids again, standing in a place neither of them was supposed to have escaped. Clara felt a dizzying rush of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a strange, protective warmth. "But how?" she stammered. You look different," he finished for her, a hint of wry amusement in his tone. "A lot can change in 15 years, Clara." He told her a condensed version of his story right there at the window of her food truck. He'd been adopted by a wealthy, childless couple, given a new name, a new life. He excelled in school, poured himself into his work, and built an empire from the ground up, fueled by a relentless drive to never be that powerless, forgotten boy again. As he spoke, Clara felt the chasm between their worlds widen into an impassable canyon. He was Elias Vance, the tech mogul. She was Clara, the food truck girl. "I never forgot you," he said, his voice dropping again, becoming more personal. "You were the only one who was ever kind to me for no reason." He reached into his wallet, but instead of pulling out cash for coffee, he slid a black credit card across the counter. "Let me help you, Clara. Whatever you need. This truck, a new apartment, anything. Consider it back pay for all those desserts." But Clara pushed the card back gently, her fingers brushing his. The warmth of her touch was simple, real. "I don't need your money, Eli," she said, using his old name without thinking. Her voice was soft, but the same quiet firmness from before had returned. "It's good to see you. That's enough." She turned to the next customer, leaving Elias standing there, holding a credit card that could buy almost anything in the world, except the one thing he suddenly realized he wanted: a simple, honest connection with the girl who remembered him when he was nobody. Elias became a fixture at the food truck, a strange and constant presence in Clara's carefully structured mornings. He arrived at the same time every day, dressed in impeccable suits that seemed to repel the city's grime, and he always waited his turn in line, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face whenever he saw her. He never ordered food, only a black coffee, which he would nurse for almost an hour, standing off to the side, watching her work. He wasn't just observing, he was studying. He noticed the way she greeted every customer by name, the quiet kindness in her eyes when she slipped an extra pastry into a bag for a mother with a crying toddler, the focused determination in her movements as she single-handedly managed the morning rush. Their conversations were brief, snatched in the moments between orders. He learned about the long hours she worked, the constant struggle to make ends meet, the dream she had of one day opening a small, brick-and-mortar bakery. She learned less about him. He spoke of his work in vague, detached terms, preferring to ask about her day, about the truck, about the people she served. It was as if he was trying to absorb the warmth and authenticity of her world, a world so starkly different from his own. "You should expand," he said one morning, gesturing to the long line of customers. "Franchise. You could have a fleet of these trucks." Clara just laughed, wiping down the counter. "And who would run them?" A bunch of people who don't know that Mrs. Gable likes her tea with honey, not sugar? This place works because it's me, Eli. It's small. He fell silent, but a thoughtful look crossed his face. He saw a business opportunity, but she saw a community. The difference between them was vast, yet it was precisely that difference that drew him in. One afternoon, as she was closing up, he was still there, leaning against a nearby wall. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his tone shifting from casual customer to CEO. "My company is hosting a large charity fundraiser next month. I want you to cater the dessert reception." Clara stopped what she was doing, her back to him. "Eli, I make cinnamon rolls and muffins. I don't cater black tie galas. I don't want fancy pastries," he said, stepping closer. "I want your food. I want people to taste something real for a change." She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of doubt and intrigue. The event would be held at the Vance Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that pierced the city skyline, a symbol of everything his life had become. It was a world she couldn't imagine stepping into. "I don't have the staff," she argued, "or the equipment." "I'll provide everything," he countered. "All you have to do is bake. The pay will be more than you make in 6 months." The money was tempting, life-changing even. It could mean a new oven for the truck, a security deposit on a better apartment, a little breathing room in a life that was constantly constricted by finances. But it was more than the money. It was the look in his eyes, a genuine belief in her that no one had shown in a very long time. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The night of the gala, Clara felt like an imposter. She stood in a vast, sterile catering kitchen on the 50th floor, surrounded by stainless steel and a team of professional chefs Elias had hired to assist her. She wore a simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, but it felt plain and inadequate next to the designer gowns and jewels that drifted past the kitchen doors. But once she started baking, the anxiety began to melt away. The familiar scent of cinnamon and melting butter filled the air, a comforting reminder of her own small corner of the world. She arranged her rustic pastries on elegant silver platters, a stark contrast to the delicate, architectural desserts being prepared by the main caterers. Later, Elias found her in the kitchen, observing the event from a distance. "They love it," he said, gesturing towards the reception hall where guests were swarming her dessert table. "I told you they would." "They're just pastries, Eli," she said, unable to accept the compliment. Just then, a small girl with big, curious eyes and a dress made of pink tulle wandered into the kitchen, holding the hand of a stern-looking nanny. The girl pointed at one of Clara's cinnamon rolls. "Can I have that one?" she asked, her voice small. Before the nanny could refuse, Clara knelt down, breaking off a piece of the warm pastry and handing it to the girl. "Of course, sweetheart," she said with a smile. The girl's face lit up as she took a bite. Elias watched the scene, a strange ache in his chest. The little girl was his daughter, Lily. Lily, his 5-year-old daughter, was a quiet, observant child who lived in a world of silent beauty and overwhelming schedules. Since her mother had passed away 2 years prior in a sudden car accident, Lily had retreated into herself, communicating more with her drawings than with words. She was cared for by a rotating cast of highly qualified, emotionally distant nannies who managed her playdates and tutoring sessions with corporate efficiency. Elias loved his daughter fiercely, but he didn't know how to reach her. He provided for her, protected her, but the language of gentle, everyday connection was one he had long forgotten. Seeing her smile at Clara, a simple, unprompted expression of joy over a piece of pastry, struck a chord deep within him. After the little girl, Lily, and her nanny left the kitchen, Elias turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "You're good with her," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Clara shrugged, a faint blush on her cheeks. "I just like kids. They're honest." The rest of the evening was a blur for Clara. Her desserts were a massive success, praised for their rustic charm and authentic flavor. Powerful people in expensive clothes complimented her, asked for her card, and talked about investment opportunities. It was overwhelming and felt deeply unreal. At the end of the night, Elias handed her a check that made her hands tremble. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. But as she stood by the service elevator, ready to return to her real life, he stopped her. "This isn't just about the catering, Clara," he said, his gaze serious. "I saw how Lily looked at you. It was different." He hesitated, the confident CEO, suddenly seeming vulnerable. I have another proposal. I want to hire you. Not as a caterer. I want you to be Lily's companion. Clara was speechless. A nanny? Eli, I'm a baker. I don't have any qualifications. I've hired the most qualified people in the country, he said, a note of frustration in his voice. They teach her Mandarin and violin, but none of them have ever made her smile like that. I don't need another tutor. She needs warmth. She needs you. The offer was absurd, yet undeniably compelling. The salary he proposed was astronomical, enough to solve all her financial problems, and then some. But it was the thought of Lily, the quiet, sad-eyed little girl, that truly tugged at her heart. She saw in Lily a reflection of the lonely children she'd grown up with, a reflection of Eli himself. She asked for a day to think about it. The next afternoon, she met him at a small, quiet park. Lily was there, sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. When she saw Clara, a small, hopeful smile touched her lips. Clara sat down beside her, and Lily shyly showed her the drawing. A picture of a smiling lady with blonde hair handing a pastry to a little girl. Underneath it, Lily had written, "The nice baker." That was the moment Clara made her decision. She agreed to the job, not for the money, but for the little girl who drew pictures of kindness. She started the following Monday. Stepping into Elias's penthouse apartment was like entering another dimension. It was a vast space of glass, steel, and minimalist furniture with breathtaking views of the city. It was stunningly beautiful, but it felt cold, sterile, and silent, more like a museum than a home. Clara's role was simple: to spend a few hours with Lily each afternoon, to play, to talk, to just be present. Slowly, miraculously, Lily began to open up. They baked cookies in the enormous and used kitchen, filling the silent apartment with the scent of vanilla. They built pillow forts in the living room, messing up the perfectly arranged designer cushions. They read stories, and for the first time, Lily started to read the words aloud with her. Elias would often come home to find them like that, sitting on the floor surrounded by books and laughter. He never interrupted, just stood in the doorway, watching, a complex mix of gratitude and longing on his face. The cold, empty penthouse was starting to feel like a home, and it was all because of her. The slow transformation of Elias's penthouse from a silent gallery of wealth to a place of warmth and laughter was a quiet miracle orchestrated by Clara. The change was most evident in Lily, who blossomed under Clara's gentle attention. She started talking more, her voice losing its timid edge. She initiated games, told silly jokes, and her drawings began to feature bright, smiling suns instead of gray, rainy skies. But the change was also happening in Elias. He started coming home from work earlier, his excuses about reviewing documents becoming increasingly transparent. He was coming home to be near them, to catch the last few minutes of their story time, to hear Lily's laughter echoing through the halls. One evening, Clara was helping Lily put away her art supplies when she found a drawing tucked under a cushion. It was a family portrait: a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with blonde hair, all holding hands under a rainbow. It was labeled "My Family." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She quietly folded the picture and put it in her pocket, the weight of the child's wish settling heavily in her chest. The unspoken feelings between Clara and Elias grew in the shared silences and small moments of their days. A lingering glance over Lily's head, a casual touch of hands as they both reached for the same storybook, a shared smile when Lily said something particularly funny. It was a fragile, tentative dance, and both were too afraid to name it. The first real crack in their carefully constructed professional relationship came in the form of Veronica Croft. She was a senior vice president at Elias's company, a sharp, ambitious woman with a long-standing and unrequited interest in her boss. She saw Clara not as a companion for Lily, but as a threat. Veronica made a surprise visit to the penthouse one afternoon under the guise of dropping off some urgent papers. She found Clara and Lily on the floor, covered in finger paint. Her lip curled in a barely concealed sneer. "Elias," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I didn't realize you'd hired live-in art therapy." Clara stood up, wiping her hands on a towel, her cheeks flushing. "We were just having some fun." "I'm sure you were," Veronica said, her eyes raking over Clara's simple clothes. "It must be quite a step up from that little food truck." The comment was designed to wound, and it did. It was a sharp reminder of the world she came from, the world she felt she could never truly leave behind. Elias, who had just walked in, heard the entire exchange. His face darkened. "That's enough, Veronica," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Clara is a guest in this home. You will treat her with respect." Veronica was taken aback by his sharp tone but quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. "Oh, Elias, don't be so serious. I was just making a joke." "It wasn't funny," he said flatly. "You can leave the papers on the table." Humiliated, Veronica shot a venomous glare at Clara before turning on her heel and stalking out. After she left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Clara began cleaning up the paints, her movements stiff. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Elias said, stepping closer. "It's fine," Clara said, not looking at him. "She's not wrong. I don't belong here." "That's not true," he said fiercely. "You belong here more than she ever will." He reached out, placing a hand on her arm, and the touch was electric. She finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. In that moment, the pretense fell away. He wasn't her boss, and she wasn't his employee. They were just a man and a woman, standing in a room filled with unspoken emotions. He leaned in, and she didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepened with all the unspoken longing that had been building between them for weeks. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they had both been avoiding. But when it ended, the reality of their situation came crashing back down. Clara pulled away, her expression a whirlwind of confusion and fear. "We can't do this, Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I work for you. This is complicated." Before he could respond, she gathered her things and fled, leaving Elias standing alone in the quiet, paint-scented room, the taste of her on his lips and an ache of loss already settling in his chest. The next day, Clara didn't show up for work. Her call came in the late morning, her voice distant and professional. She was resigning, effective immediately. She gave no reason, just a polite, formal goodbye that felt like a slap in the face. Elias was devastated, but he was also a CEO. He knew how to compartmentalize. He threw himself into his work with a renewed, almost manic intensity, working late, scheduling back-to-back meetings, and avoiding his silent, empty penthouse. But the world, it seemed, was not done with them. A few days later, a photo appeared on a popular gossip blog. It was a grainy, long-lens shot of him and Clara on the night of the gala, standing close together in the kitchen. The headline was salacious and cruel. Billionaire CEO Elias Vance finds a new charity case, from food truck to penthouse. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo, painting Clara as a calculating gold digger and Elias as a lonely man being taken for a ride. Elias knew instantly that Veronica was behind it. He confronted her, and after a series of flimsy denials, she admitted to leaking the photo and the story. He fired her on the spot, but the damage was done. The story went viral. Clara, who had been trying to quietly disappear, was suddenly thrust into a harsh, unwelcome spotlight. She stopped answering her phone, barricading herself in her small apartment, the cruel words of strangers on the internet echoing in her ears. She felt foolish, naive, and deeply ashamed. She had allowed herself to hope, to feel something for a man from a different universe, and now she was paying the price. Elias tried to reach her, calling, texting, even showing up at her apartment, but she refused to see him. In her mind, everything Veronica had said, everything the article implied, felt true. She was the food truck girl who didn't belong. Meanwhile, the silence in the penthouse became unbearable for Lily. "Where's Clara?" she asked every day, her small face etched with confusion and sadness. "I want the nice baker." Her questions were like tiny daggers in Elias's heart. He had tried to build a fortress of wealth to protect his daughter from the pain of the world, but he had failed. He had brought someone into her life who made her happy, only to have it all fall apart. He had not only lost Clara, but he had broken his daughter's heart in the process. The realization was a crushing weight. His empire, his success, his carefully constructed life, it all meant nothing if the people he loved were hurting. He had to fix it, but he knew that this time, money and power were not the answer. He had to find a different way, a way that spoke Clara's language, the language of sincerity, humility, and real, honest gestures. The community center in the neighborhood where Clara and Elias had grown up was a tired, brick building with a leaky roof and faded murals on the walls. It had been the heart of the community for decades, a place of after-school programs, potluck dinners, and support groups, but it had fallen on hard times, slated for demolition to make way for a luxury condo development. This was where Elias decided to make his stand. He called a press conference, not at his gleaming corporate headquarters, but on the cracked pavement in front of the rundown community center. The media turned out in droves, intrigued by the unusual venue and the promise of a statement regarding the recent scandal. Clara saw the news alert on her phone. She wasn't going to go, but something pulled her there, a need to see, to understand, to hear his voice one last time. She slipped in at the back of the crowd, her face hidden by a scarf, just as Elias stepped up to the podium. He looked tired but resolute. He didn't start with a corporate greeting or a prepared statement. He started with a story. 15 years ago, I was a boy living in a children's home not far from here, he began, his voice steady. I was lonely and scared, and I didn't think I had a future. But there was a girl there who showed me kindness when no one else did. She shared her food with me. She stood up for me, and she taught me that you don't have to have anything to be a good person. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers. I spent the next 15 years building a life I thought would make me safe, building walls of wealth and success. I thought that's what mattered. I was wrong. The reporters were scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. Recently, I found that girl again, he continued, his gaze locked on Clara. And she reminded me of what truly matters. Not profits, not power, but community, kindness, showing up for people. He gestured to the building behind him. That's why I am announcing today that Vance Industries is purchasing this property. But we are not tearing it down. We are rebuilding it. We are funding a new, state-of-the-art community center, complete with a culinary training program and a bakery that will be run by the most talented and compassionate baker I have ever known. A gasp went through the crowd. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Elias stepped down from the podium and walked directly towards her, the crowd parting before him. He stopped in front of her, oblivious to the cameras and the whispers. "This isn't charity, Clara," he said, his voice low and earnest. "This is an investment. In this community, in the values you taught me, and in us." He then dropped to one knee, pulling out a small, simple box. Inside was not a massive diamond, but a delicate ring with a small, unassuming sapphire, the color of her eyes. "I don't want to be your boss or your savior," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want to be the man who gets to come home to you and Lily. Will you marry me, Clara?" Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Through the blur, she saw not a billionaire CEO, but Eli, the boy she had once shared her dessert with, now a man offering her his whole heart. "Yes," she whispered, the word a mix of a sob and a laugh. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and as the crowd erupted in applause, he stood and pulled her into his arms, a silent promise passing between them that this time they would build a future together, not on a foundation of wealth, but on something much stronger, a shared past and a belief in the power of kindness. 1 year later, the new community center, renamed the Clarabelle Kitchen, was a vibrant hub of activity. The scent of fresh bread and roasting vegetables filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed in the halls. The center offered free meals, culinary classes for at-risk youth, and a safe, warm space for the community to gather. Clara, no longer just a food truck girl, was the heart and soul of the operation. She moved through the gleaming new kitchen with a quiet confidence, her apron now a crisp white, but the same smudge of flour often gracing her cheek. She was a teacher, a mentor, and a friend to everyone who walked through the doors. Elias was there too, not as a benefactor watching from a distance, but as a partner. Most afternoons, he could be found in the back, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes, or helping a teenager with their business plan for a new food startup. He had delegated much of his CEO duties, choosing instead to invest his time in what he now called his most important merger. Lily was a permanent fixture, her shyness replaced by a bright, bubbly confidence. She would often help in the kitchen, her official title being Chief Sprinkle Officer, a role she took very seriously. She called Clara Mama Clara, and the title fit as if it had been tailor-made. The wedding was a small, private affair held in the center's new community garden, surrounded by rows of herbs and blooming flowers. Arthur, the old man from the food truck, walked her down the aisle. Maria, the nursing student, was her maid of honor. Their guests were a mix of suited executives and neighborhood regulars, a beautiful, eclectic family they had built together. They didn't live in the sterile penthouse anymore. They had bought a modest house with a big backyard just a few blocks from the center. It wasn't a mansion, but it was filled with the sounds of Lily's laughter, the smell of Clara's baking, and the quiet, contented presence of a family that had found its way home. One evening, the three of them were sitting on their back porch, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight sky. Lily was curled up between them, sleepy and content. "You know," Elias said quietly, his arm around Clara's shoulders, "I spent my whole life chasing success, thinking it would make me happy." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "And did it?" He looked down at his daughter, then at his wife, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. "No," he said, his voice filled with a profound, peaceful certainty. "This did." He kissed the top of her head as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest fortunes are not the ones you build, but the ones you are lucky enough to be remembered by. The kitchen was the heart of their home, just as it had always been the heart of Clara's life. Sunlight streamed through the large window over the sink, illuminating the fine layer of flour that seemed to permanently dust every surface. One Saturday morning, nearly 2 years after their wedding, the scene was one of happy, chaotic domesticity. Lily, now a confident 7-year-old, stood on a stool, diligently stirring a bowl of pancake batter, her tongue stuck out in concentration. Elias, dressed in a worn t-shirt and jeans, was attempting to flip a pancake, which ended up folded into a misshapen lump. He grimaced at his handiwork. "I still don't have the wrist action right," he lamented. Clara laughed, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "It's okay," she said, resting her chin on his shoulder. "It looks abstract. We'll call it a deconstructed pancake." He turned and kissed her, a slow, easy kiss that spoke of years of shared mornings. "Whatever you say, boss," he murmured against her lips. Their life was a beautiful tapestry woven from the threads of their two different worlds. Elias still ran his company, but his leadership style had changed. He was more compassionate, more invested in his employees' well-being, and his company had become a leader in corporate social responsibility. The Clarabelle Kitchen was a thriving success, with a waiting list for its training programs and plans to open 2 more locations in underserved neighborhoods. Clara had discovered a passion for teaching, for empowering others through the simple, profound act of feeding them. They were a team, in life and in work, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. Later that day, they were at the park, the same park where Lily had once shyly shown Clara her drawing. Now, she was fearlessly climbing the monkey bars, her laughter bright and clear. Elias and Clara sat on a nearby bench, watching her. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked, her voice soft. "The day I almost ordered a coffee and you told me to wait my turn?" Elias smiled, taking her hand in his. "Every single day," he said. "It was the first time in a decade that someone saw me and not the name on my credit card." He squeezed her hand. "You saved me that day, Clara. Not just from a bad mood, but from a life that was empty." She looked at their intertwined hands, then up at his face. "You know," she said, a playful glint in her eye, "I think you still owe me for that coffee." He chuckled, a deep, happy sound. "I think I do," he said, leaning in to kiss her again. "I'll be paying you back for the rest of my life." A small voice interrupted them. "You mushy stuff," Lily yelled from the top of the slide, wrinkling her nose. They both laughed, pulling apart. "Come on, Mama Clara. Push me," she demanded. Clara stood up, her face glowing with a serene happiness. "Coming, sweetie," she called out. As she walked towards the swings, Elias watched her go, his heart full. The food truck girl who had told him to wait his turn had ended up teaching him what was truly worth waiting for. It wasn't power or wealth or success. It was this simple, beautiful, extraordinary life. And as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the park, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was the richest man in the world. If a story about a food truck, a forgotten friendship, and a love that was stronger than any business deal stirred your soul, then you're in the right place. Here at Heart-Wrenching Stories, we believe that the most powerful connections are often the most unexpected. If you believe that too, hit that hype button to show your support, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us all of the power of kindness. Share in the comments what your favorite part of Clara and Elias's journey was. Until next time, remember to be kind. You never know whose life you might change.